My guest today is a professor and author of the great book, Protest History of the United States. I'm honored to have her as a guest. Her book explores the history and significance of various protests and social justice movements throughout the U.S. history. Welcome to the show, Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. How are you
Thank you.
today?
I'm doing well, madam.
So, Gloria, this book is an amazing collection of pages that it's invokes something in me like I got to read more. I got to study more. And my first question to you is what inspired you to write this book in particular?
This is my seventh book.
Yeah.
And so when I've written the other books, I saw that there was so much movement and that people took for granted. And I wanted one to honor those who had already sacrificed and had been forgotten. And that included many women. But I also wanted us to realize that there was no Santa Claus that came and gave us our rights. Nobody came in and said, great, we have this constitution. Now come on for equality, everybody. That didn't happen. Every constitutional right we have, everything we wake up with every day, somebody had to protest over long periods of time. And I wanted to help the new protesters, the young protesters, to realize it's not a one and done, that you have to be in there for the long term because the people you're opposing are in it for the long term. And once you start reading the different protests and protesters, then you start realizing that even the 8-hour work week was something that took decades for us to get.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that we have that didn't come through protests, but I think people disconnected the protest from the benefit that we're receiving.
It's so timely. You're like an oracle because it's very timely, you know. Uh, one of my other questions going through just researching this book, um, did you ever find yourself in your research having like getting overwhelmed of different stories and people that you were including in this book?
I was, because there are going to be people or protests that someone wants in that I had to make a decision. So I had different protests representative of other protests that were taking place during that time period. And there were times when I was looking at just like the uprisings, the urban uprisings over police violence, how long this has been going on. When you realize that 1669 in Virginia colony is when they passed the first law to say that they could kill an African, and if a European did it, there would be no felony
Yeah.
conviction or charges. That's how long they've been getting away with killing us without having any legal or criminal consequences. And so once you start following these arcs, it does become kind of overwhelming a little bit because you realize just how much we've had to do in order to be where we are now. And it's also overwhelming when I hear people say, I'm sitting out. I'm going to sit out right now. So I'm thinking, I just wrote all of this that people did for us to even get to this point to have the privilege of saying, I'm going to sit this out. It's
Yeah.
like, can you, I mean, in the large and small ways in which people protested, and the fact that I pay homage to those because I can't put all the names in. And I just want to just please let people know that I know a protester, she's passed on now, who died. She didn't even have money enough to be buried. People had to, and she was a grassroots organizer, people had to come together to put money together for her to have just a basic funeral. So people have given so much over the years. And I just wanted this book to say a little bit about all that goes into giving us the rights we have today and making those rights a reality.
Yeah. This book you say is a project intertwined with history and memoirs. And I
Yes.
love that. And I want to talk about your personal story that just is so amazing. This book, and I interviewed someone, and we were just talking about family history. Doing this book, how did it take you to another level? Just like that's the reason why we need to continue, our families need to tell our stories.
I'm going to tell you, I I have been asked to write memoir before, and for those people who do it, I give them all the props because to have to reveal things about yourself in a book is very difficult.
Yeah.
And I didn't really reveal as much as my publisher wanted, but when I speak of and talk about getting emotional about my great great grandmother Eliza, who was enslaved and had to fight her slave master and slave mistress, and the fact that she lived through all of that just to get out of slavery, and then have people, and she and the rest of the family, like, and other members, built schools after slavery ended, just to have the Ku Klux Klan come and burn the schools down.
Yeah.
And you just see like this 2 steps forward, 1 step back constantly. But then I realized she stayed in the game. She didn't give up. And her granddaughter then becomes a school teacher, and her grandson becomes a lawyer. And when you read this, you would think it was somebody else's life. It's very difficult for me to think it's my life. So then the weight of it is, and the joy is, what do I now owe the future? Because she did all these things without ever knowing I would exist, but perhaps hoping I would. And we all have stories like this in our family. Like you said, if you ask your grandparents, or if you're blessed enough to still have your great grandparents, and ask them, my mother used to talk about our enslaved relatives when I was a little girl. And I remember those stories, and it stayed in the back of my mind. And I said, at some point, I'm going to have this somewhere, because my other history books are just history. It's fascinating. I love it. She took justice, the Black woman, law and power, and all of that. But to put in your actual family, your relatives, and how they protested in their own large and small ways, it really, that was something that made me feel more indebted to doing more, and
Yeah.
to spreading the word, and helping people to get that courage that their ancestors had.
Yeah. I love that. In your introduction titled Our Conflicted Protest History, you speak about the United States was conceived by gunfire and born in rebellion, a breached birth. I had to set the book down for a minute and I said, whoa, a breached birth. Writing that introduction, did the words just fall off your fingers when you typed it? Because you just speak the truth. It's like a sermon.
Thank you, because one of the things I say in there is that protest is spiritual. And
Yeah.
in writing these books, I wanted to tap into the spiritual side of me. I actually wanted, and I asked God, give me the words. And so, in trying to set those words down to talk about a country, you have the United States of America. United States is this empire building bully that, it will oppress anybody for $1. And then you have the America part that's saying, oh, please come here, and make a new life for yourself, and we will help you, and we will support you. So this country is like at odds with itself. It's conflicted. It's like some bipolar thing going on, where you have this one group being mean and the other group being nice. And when people come here, they're like always amazed as immigrants, saying, we don't understand this country. On the one hand, you try to be nice, but the other hand, you're so cruel.
Yeah.
And that's the way it started, because this was a country that killed his father to exist. So the
Yeah.
United States killed the king, or not killed, but
Yeah.
symbolically in breaking away. And so the Declaration of Independence is a protest document, and yet this country despises people who protest. So they can protest, but no one else is supposed to protest.
Right.
So people are ever confused. It's because this country is so conflicted, and that causes a confusion.
Yeah.
It's you're going to have the part of the Constitution that says freedom of speech and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Then you have another part of the country that will crush you for freedom of speech and petitioning the government for a redress of grievances. So those two things are happening, and I was hoping to capture that in the book. And thank you so much
Yeah.
for picking up on that, because it's bizarre for this country.
It really is. And when we talk about protest, um, I wanted to just kind of someone who just sees it and doesn't understand it, because some people think, even the millennials and even the younger generations, just, it's more than just, it's so many different forms of protest. And you know, a protest, they say it's an act of defiance against injustice, often involving collective actions. And when we like, what made you, when you put this book together, the protests that you included, how were you able to decide? Because it's so many.
Yes, I think protests can take many, many forms. And
Yeah,
that's part of why I wanted to write this book, that the protest can be, of course, what we know about protests in the streets with people with signs and bullhorns, but protest is also remaining seated, which is what Rosa Parks did.
yeah,
So you could have that. You don't picture Rosa Parks with a sign in the street, but you see her nationally and internationally as a protester.
yeah,
So you can have a sit-in as a protest. You, you can have a song as a so there's so many ways in which we need to think about protest.
yeah. I'd love to just talk about a couple of the chapters of this brilliant book, Protest History of the United States. Each chapter caught my eye, caught my ear, caught my heart, because you go deep and you go back to the beginnings. Uh, and I'm just thinking about this. This was not one of the chapters I wanted to highlight, but because I said you go back, the indigenous defense of land, life, and culture. I just shook my head because when you went deep, you went so deep talking about the indigenous people being on their land, and then people come in, the Europeans, the Columbus, they come in and want to fight on their land. And
Yes,
you just break down the chief in his Powhatan.
Powhatan. So, and the
Powhatan.
Powhatan, yes, and that's what's so amazing. They tried diplomacy. They tried to feed them and say, okay, you have your food. Can you go now? You know,
On your
and it,
land.
on their land. And for
Yeah.
them, over all these centuries, and that's why I say the origin story of protest begins with the Native Americans who
Yeah.
say, this is my land. And, it doesn't belong to us because they don't look at land ownership that way. They look at land as they're caretakers of the land.
Yeah.
And so for them to be caretakers, that means they have to share the land in a certain way, but you don't come in and take it over. So this, and then to have their culture, their language taken from them, all these different things that happened. So their protests to maintain culture. And I think that's something that we as African Americans have done all this time in ways large and small to maintain our culture when
Yeah.
people are saying you have no culture to maintain. So that's why, the fight to keep your culture is protesting to be artificially assimilated or forced assimilation into a completely other culture where they find that you don't belong, but
Yeah.
they don't want you being yourself either. So all of those things come into play when you think of protest and how protest has changed over time. But the large and small lawsuits are protests. And some of these lawyers who have capitulated, recently, people who have law degrees, we have more law degrees than ever before. What are you doing with it? How are you using that? Education, if we have freedom schools, they're banning books. So maybe in your living room, that's when you need to teach young people about their history, or other people as well. All these organizations. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. There's,
Hmm.
oh my goodness.
Sorrow.
Oh
Yes.
my, oh my goodness.
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
that's, see, and this and the whole thing about what we do as a sorority in our public service,
Yeah.
to maintain culture. The creation of our sorority was protest against, what was happening, and the fact that we needed to stand up and have an organization of our own. So there's so much that we have to think about all the time
Yeah.
about when it comes to protest.
Absolutely. Um, Chapter 2. What to the slave is the 4th of July? A great keynote speech by the great Frederick Douglass in July of 1882. That's when you begin to tell the story of your family, uh, Eliza Bradshaw, which I love that you sprinkled it throughout the book.
Thank you.
Amazing. Um, when you started that chapter, what was your inspiration?
I wanted people to remember Frederick Douglass, um, and to understand that he had been enslaved, escaped from slavery, and became this statesman, this person, this orator, all of these things. I want us to, realize survival is protest. Actually realizing your dreams despite all the opposition is a protest that you are going to demand your space on the planet during the time you're here. That to me is protest. And the fact that as an orator, that Frederick Douglass would speak truth to power all the time, even when he was comfortable. He was doing very well in his life, as was later on Martin Luther King. We're talking about people who are doing very well. They don't have to speak up anymore, but they continue to do so because they were no longer speaking up just for themselves. They were speaking up for others as well. So I wanted people to understand that there's more to success and there's more to life than just getting it for yourself. We have examples of people in the worst of times who decided that they would use their resources as their platforms and their platforms as platforms to protest, not just for themselves, but for their communities and for others. So all those people out there with platforms, having a platform for platform's sake, that's not how we got to the place where you could have a platform in the first place.
That's
In
right.
order for us to have a platform, we had to have people, generations before us, who sacrificed in large and small ways. And maybe people have platforms now, don't see the exact person who helped them, but somebody did, because it didn't just fall out of the sky. As I said, there was no Santa Claus that gave us these things. Somebody did something to allow us to have the platforms that we have for you and I, Soror, to even be on the air right now. There were
Absolutely.
others who were on the air and use their platforms to expand it for other people like us. So
Absolutely.
other writers, for me to be able to even be a writer, I had to have like other Black writers and other women and other people. So to protest to me and Frederick Douglass to me means that even in the worst times, we can still speak out.
Yeah. Chapter 5 actually caught my attention, but the spirit has moved me to move to chapter 6 for us to talk about because it's very important. Her body, her ballot, her protests. I love this whole book. Being a woman, being a Black woman, chapter 6 was just platinum, not even golden, Professor. I love that you included Margaret Brent, Elizabeth Key. You introduced me to individuals I didn't know about, and it makes me want to go find them more, and know a little bit more about them. I would love for you to talk about Black Bess, Elizabeth Key.
Um, Black Bess was Elizabeth Key's mother in the
Hmm.
1600s, and this in our bodies as women have been used for empire building because they could take over the land, but they need those babies. And that's what's going on right now, actually.
Yeah,
This need for those particular types of babies to be born, whether or not for economic labor reasons, for population reasons, but the female body has been used for so long. It's been a place of warfare, as a matter of fact. And so Elizabeth Key was the biracial daughter of Thomas Key and Black Bess. Black Bess was an Angolan woman. And the question then becomes, is Elizabeth Key a enslaved person, or is she a free person? Does she take the status of her father, an Englishman, or of her mother, Black Bess, who's a servant? And so the case goes to court. And one of the reasons why I really appreciate law when it comes to legal history is because they write law down. They write the cases down. And so I spend my time in these archives reading about these old cases from the 1600s and such. And they've digitized some, but most still are not digitized. And so going back into those books and reading these cases, I read about the case of Elizabeth Key. And she won in the end. They changed the law for her. Then they created a law that from now on, the status of a baby born is that of the mother, not of the father. And that way, none of these Europeans would be responsible for the babies that they, help procreate. And then those babies become enslaved in vitro.
Mm.
So here's how you can keep producing servants by having these babies be born of enslaved mothers, and then the baby now is enslaved. And that's how you see from the 1600s going forward, they could create this empire based on labor guaranteed from the babies that were born from enslaved mothers. So that's the role that we see of Elizabeth Key. And but I just happened to be giving a speech one time, and this one white male attorney said, wait a minute. My last name is Key, and we trace our families back to the 1600s. Did not know. He did not know. He was like, oh my goodness, he did not know that that was his relative, and that was her place in legal history. And he's an attorney at a major firm in New York City and did not know that this case was connected to his family line.
Wow. Wow. I'm so curious, when you finished the chapter, what was the chapter, was your last chapter that you finished this book?
My last chapter in this book actually is on climate change and environmental racism.
Okay.
And what got me about that was I remember growing up in the Midwest and having a highway put through our community, through eminent domain. And they would take the property, give you very little, and then put a highway. So to this day, every time it makes me ill when I ride through that highway, drive through, and I see the homes on either side. And remember when this used to be an intact community, and now it's got a Black community on one side, a Black community on the other side, and a highway through the middle. And this urban renewal, or Negro removal is what we used to call it, this happened throughout the country for communities of color. And think about the gas fumes going into homes from a highway. The homes are literally within 10 to 15 feet from the highway. The same thing happened in Greenwood in Oklahoma. I went to the Greenwood community because they tried to destroy that community completely in 1921 when they bombed the community and burned it down because they were jealous of our progress and success. And so they do these things, and communities now have to live with the exhaust fumes, with the tire dust, with all of this that comes from some millions of cars going back and forth through their homes and past their homes. And I was looking at climate change. Yes, that's one thing, but to me, it connects to environmental racism. And I just want people who are into climate change to also think about the environmental racism, all the places where the toxic waste dumps and the bus depots and all these things that are happening. But I also like the fact that I'm ending it with the Native American story again, because I have relatives who the Bradshaw line married a Native American line, and now the children are being raised with both cultures.
Yeah.
And so I start off with the indigenous and I end with the indigenous and my story of my family coming together, and in different ways, and in teaching these young people who are 2 and 4 years old about their indigenous and their African American culture is protest once again against forced assimilation, that you're just going to be forced into a counterculture even though that culture doesn't want you. And that in the awkwardness of the mental stress of conflict between being in a culture that doesn't really want you, yet that culture is telling you you must look like them, act like them, speak like them, and forget your own culture because it's not valuable, but to
Yeah.
maintain value in that culture. And that's another thing. Protest the need for value of family history and cultural history to remain a part of our lives, because that's what keeps us strong.
I so agree. In this beautiful book, Protest History of the United States, these unsung heroes and the sung heroes, just these heroes, period. You mentioned Fannie Lou Hamer, who I love.
Hmm.
Um, I also, you've introduced me to some new people. Dole Remap. I love that story. I love that history. You are honoring. Did you realize that you're honoring these people with these pages?
I was hoping to, because so many like Dore Map in law school, everyone learns about the case of Map versus Ohio. MAPP Map versus Ohio. Nobody looks at the fact it's Dore Map. She's a Black woman who protested, stood against police officers when they came to her home without a warrant. So we have these rights today that, evidence that's seized without a warrant in state court cannot be used if it was obtained unconstitutionally
Yeah,
because of Dore Map. So I wanted to give her that credit. Daisy Bates. I wanted these women and so many of them to get their flowers now. Some of them might have gotten a petal or two during their lifetime, but we owe them to remember them and to honor their contributions to the rights we have that we take for granted, especially under the circumstances in which so many of these rights are being pushed back and rolled back, and our history is being erased in front of our eyes.
yeah,
And if we don't remember our history, then we're going to be in a very difficult situation in the future.
yeah. This book was so important. And when I think of the word protest, especially in the time that we're in, like now, 2025, there is a rising protest with Target now that
Yes.
Pastor Jamal Bryant is leading the way um, on this. And I actually hit him. I was like, "Have you read this book, though?" Because just looking at I love how you started back in the 1600s. Like this is we've been protesting.
Yes.
I guess my question is, and I wrote it down and I was like, is this silly? But I guess I will ask this. I said, do you ever think we will resolve this conflict and live in peace?
I think um, going back to, and I'm a believer, and so I believe that there can be peace in sporadic times, but our peace is going to come in heaven. We did not create these circumstances. We
Yeah,
did not go kidnap ourselves and bring ourselves here. We were brought here. And unfortunately, it's a land that has been hostile to our basic equality for
yeah,
hundreds of years. And so I think there is peace, but I think this is a land, United States of America, and in other places around the world too. There's been this anti-African, anti-African American, anti-Black phenomenon that's going on with nationalism, and this sense that we could live in peace, but freedom requires vigilance. It requires vigilance. And so if you quiet yourself too long and stay out of the game too long, then that peace is going to be lost because we're dealing with human beings who are selfishly trying to have all the resources for themselves, and they have a fear of people of color.
yeah.
And we didn't create that fear, but that's a fear that they have that's not really rational, but we cannot allow ourselves under the laws that are here and the behaviors that are taking place to sit quietly. We have to be vigilant and protect the freedoms that have been gained over generations. So we can have moments of peace, but in order to maintain those moments of peace, we have to stay vigilant.
I believe that. As I continued to read this book, I said, "Oh, this is volume one." I claimed that because I need more volumes, Professor. This just opened up my mind even more. And like I said, it spoke to me because I love history. In addition to you being a professor and an author, I was like, "Oh, she's a historian too, for sure, for sure." I wanted to leave you with saying this. James Baldwin would love this book and congratulate you and hug you and would really be proud of you. You your catalog is amazing. This just took it to the next level. I'm looking for more knowledge, more wisdom from you because this was amazing. And I want to thank you and say job well done.
Thank you, my sister.
Yes.
And I, you have touched my heart. I thank you. In writing a protest history of the United States, I gave myself over to the words. And I'm glad that those words touched you.
Yes.
Appreciate it so much.
Absolutely. My guest today is Professor Gloria J. Browne-Marshall, the author of this amazing book, A Protest History of the United States. Thank you.